there it is. So this is our heart model. We have the two different heart models, right? So we've got the white base model, which is going to be the big one that we see here, and then we have the green base model that's out like that. So when we're looking at the structures, and you guys can be checking out yours at the same time, like we were talking about, we're going to be looking at blood vessels, major blood vessels that are going in and out of the heart. We're going to be looking at minor ones as well that are feeding the heart, as well as taking the blood back from the heart. Surface structures. We're going to get into the inside and look at layers and chambers and valves and specialized things like that. So we said that to make it easier, right, you're going to want to take it off of the stand, and then you're also going to want to dissect it to a certain extent so that you can see all these structures that we're going to be mentioning. So I'll just go down the list, and then if you want later on, we can do it by region or something like that. Now, one of the things that I will mention to you is the numbering on this is a little bit wacky. I don't know why. So, for instance, when you start to look inside of the chambers and things like that, you'll find there's Roman numerals, and then you're finding, okay, well, there's a little letter A over here, and there's another A over here, and what the heck is that about? So, the deal is, rather than going with a unique number for every structure, which they certainly could have, right? There's no limit in the number of numbers, so I don't quite get that. But they decided to go regional, where it's like Roman numeral 1 is anything associated with the right atrium. So there's going to be a Roman numeral 1A, 1B, stuff like that. And then Roman numeral 3 is going to be like right ventricle, and so you'll see a 3B and a 3E and stuff like that. So if you see some lowercase letters that seem to be redundant, it probably goes with either like a Roman numeral or something associated. Same thing here. So you'll see like, oh, there's a 4 and there's a 7, and then it's like, oh, and then there's A, B, C, D, stuff like that. So you would think of that as, you're supposed to think of that as 7A, 7B, 7C, 7D. The way we have it listed in the lab manual, trying to be as clear as possible, is when you look at these blood vessels, it just has a B, C, and D on it. So in the lab manual, we try to just put that, because otherwise you're like, well, that says B, but I'm looking for 7B, so that doesn't say, so you see what I mean? So just take that with a grain of salt. As you get familiar with the structures themselves, you'll be relying less on the numbers and letters and more on, oh, okay, I'm looking for an artery and it's feeding this area and stuff like that. Okay, so in any case, superior and inferior vena cava. So those are two of the major veins of the body. They're going to be draining into the right atrium. So what we see is superior vena cava is going to be up here, right? So we know our directional terms. Inferior vena cava is going to be down here. So superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. These are the largest veins in the body taking deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. Now here's a key thing with these, is that again, when we look at these models, see how they're a little bit different? So the superior vena cava, for instance, is one vessel. It's one big vein. Notice that there's a split like that. So the deal with blood vessels is they're kind of like city streets. If they split, they get a new name. Right? So if you come to a Y junction in a street, it probably has two new names for those streets. Also, if it moves into a new region, sometimes it gets a new name. So you're going along the 60, and if you go right, it's Mesa Drive, and if you go left, it's what? What? McQueen, right? You're like, what the heck? It's just the same road, right? And then there's like Stapley, and what does that become? Cooper, right? You're like, come on. Yeah, so they're confusing, right? So, but the same thing in terms of blood vessels. So we're going to find for some longer blood vessels, you're looking at it, you're following it along, and all of a sudden it just passes whatever behind the knee, and now it has a different name than where it was just 6 inches before that, okay? So be aware of that. And the reason that I'm bringing that up here is this is a superior vena cava here. This is also it on this model. So it's represented a little bit shorter on this model, but it's one vessel. So up here where we see it splitting, those are two different vessels. So don't go calling these superior vena cava up here. Superior vena cava is only going to be here where it's one vessel instead. As soon as it branches, gets a new name. Okay? So superior vena cava, inferior vena cava is going to be down below. They're going to be dumping into the right atrium. So the right atrium is going to be the chamber that's in here. So on a lab practical, we'd put a sticker in there. We'd say, name this space, name this chamber, or whatever. It'd be inside. Okay? But when we look at the list, the next thing it's asking about is the right auricle. So an auricle is actually going to be a surface structure. So an auricle, you know, that old woman in the Matrix, that's the auricle, right? This is a different auricle, spelled a little bit differently, but the auricle is a surface structure. It's an ear-like flap that's on the surface. So this is the right auricle that we see here. On this model, it's going to be right here, okay? That's the right auricle. The left auricle is this ear-like flap, like an elephant ear on the surface here. So the atria are actually the chambers on the inside. The auricles are these kind of ear-like flaps on the surface. A lot of times your diagrams will be a little erroneous because they'll point to it and they'll be like, what's this? And they'll say, this is the left atrium. Not really, right? The left atrium is in there for sure, but what you're pointing to right here on the surface is the auricle. Again, on lab practicals, we'll try to be as clear as possible with the question. So it'll say, you know, name this chamber, or it'll say, name this surface structure, or something like that. Or even it might say, name this ear-like flap. Okay? All right, so auricle, right auricle. When we start looking, there's right atrium, a couple below that, right? So that's going to be the chamber. When we start looking inside of the chambers, we're also going to find some interesting structures too. So when I peeled this off here and we looked at the inside of it, you can see all these muscular wrinkles in here. These muscular wrinkles here are called pectinate muscles, okay? So any of these wrinkles that we have in here, specifically in the atria, are pectinate muscles. And the reason I say in the atria is because when we look down here, right, this is from the walls of the ventricles. Oh my goodness, right? More wrinkles down there, but they have a different name, right? So up here, pectinate muscles. Down here, and we'll see this later on as we scroll down through our list, these here are called trabeculae carnae. Oh. So muscular wrinkles in the walls of the atria are called pectinate muscles. Muscular wrinkles down here in the walls of the ventricle are called trabeculae carnae instead. So they look similar, but depending on whether they're atria or ventricles, they have different names. Okay? So you have to be able to turn that over. Like this one, we can turn it over. This model isn't quite as good. We can see some wrinkles there. So these would also be pectinate muscles in this model. Not quite as obvious as in the white-based model. But that's how they would look here. Okay? Those are pectinate muscles. Right atrium, fossa ovalis is the next thing on the list. So what does fossa mean from back when we were doing bones? So, yeah, so when we look at it, it was some sort of like dip, depression, etc. Now we had a foramen, which was an actual hole that passed through something, and we will see that later on for some structures. But a fossa is going to be a shallow depression, like a dip, okay? And so fossa ovalis, we're looking in this right atrium. You see that right there? See how there's a depression? It's kind of like somebody took their thumb and squished it in clay and that left a depression right there. That's the fossa ovalis. It's oval shaped and it's a depression or dip. It's much better seen on this white-based model like that. If we look at the green-based model, all we get is this slight depression colored white right there. That's the fossa ovalis represented here instead. Okay? So the fossa ovalis is a remnant structure from the fetal circulation. In the fetal heart, and we will be looking at a model of the fetal circulation coming up. In the fetal heart, there's actually a hole, a foramen like we mentioned, that cuts right between the right atrium and the right ventricle. So it allows for a shortcut of blood to go from the right atrium straight in, from the right atrium to go right into the left atrium. So it's a hole between the two atria, sorry. And the idea there is, in the fetal circulation that we'll talk about later, the oxygen and nutrient exchange and waste product exchange occurs with the placenta, which is way down in the abdomen, okay? There's an umbilical artery and umbilical veins. Those are going to come out of the abdomen and go interface with the placenta. So that oxygen exchange, etc., has already occurred in the fetal circulation by the time it gets up here to the right atrium. So why the heck do we have to go through the rest of the circulation and try to go to the lungs and stuff like that when the lungs aren't doing anything? So let's get that oxygenated blood that's already got a fresh load of oxygen straight from the right atrium into the left atrium and get it out to the body circuit instead. We can get it there much faster. So in the fetal circulation, it's called a foramen ovale because it's a hole. But when you take your first breath and as you continue to grow, that wall seals over. There's a little flap that comes over and seals it over and then it heals over. And what you're left with is the fossa ovalis in the adult heart. And that's what we're seeing here. Okay? So that's the fossa ovalis. Then we see something that's called the opening of the coronary sinus. So I don't know how they kind of did a regional listing of the terms there. It makes it a little bit odd, but the coronary sinus, remember we said that there's this whole coronary circulation, blood vessels that are serving the heart. It's either called the coronary or the cardiac circulation. So cardiac arteries or coronary arteries and cardiac veins or coronary veins. All right, so a sinus, if you remember again, when we were talking about a sinus like in 201, like the frontal sinus was like a big opening, in that case in the frontal bone. In this case, we're talking about a sinus where you have a big opening where a bunch of veins are coming together and draining into a big opening and kind of coming as a confluence. They're all coming together. So we see like this one over here is coming in, that one there is coming in, this one here is coming in. And you see this area here where it has a number 10, it's a little bit wider diameter. That area right there is called the coronary sinus. So it's collecting deoxygenated blood from these different veins, which is called the middle cardiac vein and the great cardiac vein. Technically, this is the lesser or little cardiac vein, and it brings it all together in this gathering point here, which is called the coronary sinus. All right? Now, the opening for the coronary sinus, where is that going? Well, we know deoxygenated blood typically goes into what chamber? We got 4 chambers. Right atrium, right? The atria are the gathering points of blood back to the heart, and the right side is actually deoxygenated blood. The left side is oxygenated blood. It's separated. So this, even though we can't see it really, is going to go into the right atrium. So if we turn it around here, you see where it's like, looks like it's been cut right there, right? Where it's red? That's the opening for the coronary sinus that we just saw on the back. See that in this one? See that red opening right there? That's the opening for the coronary sinus. So that larger vein that we have on the posterior side of the heart back here is draining into the right atrium right there at the coronary sinus opening. Okay, so the coronary sinus technically is that on the posterior side of the heart and the inferior, but the opening for it is right there. So that is something that's associated with the right atrium, which is why we're talking about it right now. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, good question. If we pointed to it on the front, then you'd have to say this is the opening for the coronary sinus, right? Because that's where it opens. But if we're looking for the vessel itself, we would point to it on the posterior side back here and say, name this vessel. And that would just be coronary sinus. Yep, good question. Okay, opening of the coronary sinus, tricuspid valve. Okay, so we said that there are 4 different valves associated with the heart, right, that provide a one-way flow. So the blood is always migrating through the heart from the atrium to the ventricle, from the ventricle out, whether it's the right side or the left side. These valves are distinct from each other. We have 2 different sets. So if we kind of take an angle like that, you can see these here, and then you can see these over here. So these larger ones that we see here with all these little string-like structures and webby things coming off of them, these are what are called the atrioventricular valves. And in terms of a name, remember this is the right side, this is the left side. So this one you can call the right atrioventricular valve. It's pretty just descriptive, right? It's on the right side, it's between the atrium and the ventricle. This one would be the left atrioventricular valve. They do have alternate names as well, which are fine for you to use if you would like. So for instance, when we look on the right side here, the right AV valve or the right atrioventricular valve is also called the tricuspid valve because it has 3 different flaps to it that come together. Tricycle has 3 wheels. This has 3 cusps that come together. So this one's also called the tricuspid valve. This one over here, the left atrioventricular valve, you can use that name, or you can call this one the bicuspid valve because you would imagine, right, bicycle has how many wheels? 2 wheels, so we got 2 flaps on this one. So this one's called the bicuspid valve on the left side. Those names are interchangeable. You can use either one, that's fine. To help you remember between bicuspid and tricuspid, people will say, oh, well, you know, when you're like a little kid or when you're learning new things, you should always try it and see if you like it. You can't just reject it and say, oh, I hate that, right? You should try it at least, and then you can definitively say that you hate it. So this one on the right side is a tricuspid valve. Right to try thing, right? Tricuspid, bicuspid, or right atrioventricular valve, left atrioventricular valve. This one is also called the mitral valve. That's like an older name for it. A mitre hat is, if you think about like a cardinal or something like that, or they have those tall hats that kind of come together at a point. That valve, if you look at it like it's inverted, has those 2 flaps that come together. So somebody thought that that looks like a mitre's hat. So they also will call it the mitre or the mitral valve. So you can call that one on the left side the mitral valve as well if you want. Personally, I tend to use the more anatomical ones. I use the, even though they're longer, it makes sense to me because all it does is, oh, that's a right atrioventricular valve between those two chambers on the right side. But any of those names, as long as they're, appropriate on the left and right side, are fine. Okay. Chordae tendineae and papillary muscles. So we saw these ones, these atrioventricular valves, they have all these webby things coming off here, and then you can see that they're tied down to or rooted to these muscle bundles along there or along here. Okay? These string-like structures represented here, or represented by actual strings right there, those are the chordae tendineae. Those are the heartstrings. So sometimes there's a phrase where it says, oh, this person was playing with my heartstrings, like getting your heart going and stuff like that. Because when the heart is working really hard, there's going to be some stress on these valves, right? Because the blood is wanting to go this way and that. And so these valves close, and these heartstrings are attached to the valves, and these heartstrings, or chordae tendineae, attach to the papillary muscles that anchor them. And what they are doing is that they're ensuring that these atrioventricular valves don't prolapse or flap backwards when the blood is going through the heart, right? Because we want it to go from the atrium to the ventricle, and then from the ventricle out. We don't want it to go ventricle back through the atrium, and the blood will try to do that every single time. And if these heartstrings and the papillary muscles weren't there, then they would prolapse. They would flap back, like flapping in the wind. So the chordae tendineae are the strings, and the papillary muscles are where those strings are attached, the muscular bundles like we see here. So I always think of, like, sometimes with like hot air balloons and stuff like that, right? They'll have ropes that come off of it, and those are down to stakes, or you have people holding it to make sure that the balloon doesn't go the wrong way at an inappropriate time, right? It doesn't take off. So that's kind of like these here. It's only the atrioventricular valves that have those. When we look at these other ones, so for instance, this is the pulmonary semilunar valve here, which is going up to the pulmonary trunk. We also have up here the aortic valve, or the aortic semilunar valve, that's going up towards the aorta. These ones don't have those heartstrings. They are valves, one-way doors, but they don't have the chordae tendineae and papillary muscles. Because when the blood tries to sneak back this way, there's nothing squeezing it or pushing it back this way. It's more of kind of trying to trickle down because of gravity and stuff like that. So they're not under as much force, so they don't need all that reinforcement. But these are another two valves that you do need to know. Pulmonary valve, or pulmonary semilunar valve, right? Semi-lunar part of a moon, crescent moon-shaped cusps like that. Pulmonary semilunar valve, aortic semilunar valve like that. Okay, same thing here. Pulmonary leading to the pulmonary trunk, semilunar for the aortic right here. Okay, so we've moved from right atrium, we've moved now down into the right ventricle, so that came next on the list. In the right ventricle, we saw that we have the trabeculae carnae, right, the muscular ridges and the inner parts of the walls there, like we see there. Then, interventricular septum. So that, even though it's a long term, it has the full description in there, right? Inter means between, ventricular, ventricles, septum, right? Remember the nasal septum divides the nasal cavity? So that wall that we see here, that we see there, that separates the two ventricles, is called the interventricular septum. So here or there. Then we have, like we said, the pulmonary semilunar valve, because we're following it around. The pulmonary trunk, like a trunk of a tree, it's just one. Okay, it's one big one, so we call it a trunk, and then it's going to split, right? So you can see there's a Y junction. Part of it goes there, and the other part of it goes here. So you can see that? So this is the pulmonary trunk here. Technically, it's an artery because the blood's going away from the heart, this deoxygenated blood, but it splits, and it goes into the right pulmonary artery and the left pulmonary artery. So up here, when it splits, now you have to start calling them left and right. Same thing here, pulmonary trunk, now left pulmonary artery, and then right pulmonary artery on this model is going to be over here. Okay? All right, so we take the pulmonary arteries out to the lungs, where we can take that deoxygenated blood and pick up new oxygen and drop off carbon dioxide. Now we need to get back to the heart. What are the vessels that go back to the heart? Just generically. Veins, right? So we're going to be looking for some veins. But remember, pulmonary circulation is wacky. The colors are going to be backwards, just like we saw here. So these that you see here, these are the left pulmonary veins. These are the right pulmonary veins. If we look here, see how they all come together like that? They're all dumping into that left atrium that we see here. Same thing here. Here, left pulmonary veins, right pulmonary veins over there, and all that's coming together up here. This model, you can actually take off this area and you'll be able to look into that left atrium up there, but you can see how the arteries, or I'm sorry, the veins come in. Okay, what else do we have? Left and right pulmonary veins. So left auricle. Left auricle, ear-like flap. So that's the left auricle. Then the left atrium, remember, is a chamber. So when we point in here, that's going to be the left atrium. Left atrioventricular valve, like you see, mitral or bicuspid valve, left ventricle. Then aortic semilunar valve, that one, which curves around underneath the pulmonary trunk, leads to the aorta up here. And then the aorta itself, now we're starting to get into blood vessels again, okay? This has a lot of different regions to it. And so even though this is the aorta, we're going to find there's different regions to it. So technically, this part where it's coming straight up is called the ascending aorta. This part where it's curving is called the arch of the aorta. And then when it starts to straighten out here, it's called the descending aorta. Now there's another part, is it's going to continue on posterior to the heart. And this model actually shows us that. You see that? Ascending, arch, and then descending aorta. Now as it's going posterior to the heart, this is going through the thoracic cavity to go down and deliver oxygenated blood down to the lower parts of the body. This is called the thoracic aorta. Okay? So that's, like we said, like city streets. It moves into a new region, or as it moves along, it's getting a new name. This will continue on when it goes past the diaphragm and goes into the abdominal pelvic cavity. It's not branching, but we call it the abdominal aorta when it's going to be down here instead. We'll see that on other models. Okay, so this model here, we have these extra extensions where we can see, for instance, a good shot of the thoracic aorta, where we couldn't really see it on that one. All right, thoracic aorta, ligamentum arteriosum. Sounds like some sort of Harry Potter spell, right? In any case, when we look at that, if we kind of look at the name, ligamentum looks like ligament, right? Arteriosum looks like artery. So what this is, we're looking for something white, like a ligament. And so that's going to be here or there. So remember we had the fossa ovalis over here and over there? So that was a remnant from the fetal circulation, a shortcut in the fetal circulation. There's another shortcut as well here between the pulmonary trunk and the arch of the aorta. So in the fetal circulation, again, this blood that's on the right side here is already oxygenated, unlike the adult circulation. So if we've already done that, why are we going to go all the way to the lungs? Let's go shooting out to the body instead. So in fact, in the fetal circulation, there is an extra little artery right here that allows the blood to shortcut right into the aorta. But again, once you start breathing on your own, once you are going to separate oxygenated blood on the right, deoxygenated blood on the left, we don't want stuff mixing anymore, okay? So that dries up and becomes just a little band of connective tissue that is called the ligamentum arteriosum instead. Okay? So it's there and it's here. Okay. Then, brachiocephalic artery. So we're looking for an artery that's going away from the heart. We had this big aorta right here. And look, there's 1, 2, 3 branches coming off of it. Now remember, the circulation is that it's coming out here and it's curving around like that. So technically, that's the first branch right there. And that's the brachiocephalic artery. Then we have this branch, which is called the left common carotid artery. And we have this branch, which is called the left subclavian artery. And like usual, if you can break down the name, it's going to be very helpful in telling you where it's going or what it's feeding or what it's passing under or something like that, right? Brachio, where do you remember brachio from? Arm, right? So we talk about like the humerus and stuff like that, right? Biceps brachii, triceps brachii, things like that, brachialis. So this is headed up here, and it's going to be going towards the arm. It's going to be going towards the right arm. Remember, right side. What's cephalic? So it's the head, right? So there's going to be some branches off of this that's going to go up and deliver this oxygenated blood to the head on the right side, okay? This one, we said is the left common carotid artery. Now we're coming into Halloween, very convenient, right? So slasher movies and stuff like that, cut jugular vein, cut, right? Carotid artery. Much worse to cut the artery than the vein, because the artery has this high pressure blood that, right? So if somebody gets their throat cut in a movie, take it easy, gets their throat cut and it's like shooting across the room and pulsing and stuff like that, that means it's an artery. Because when the heart contracts, it sends this tidal wave of blood down the arteries, and it's very high pressure like that. If they get their throat cut and you just see the blood go like straight down their front side, that means the vein has been cut, because the vein's on the other side of the loop. It's low pressure, and so it just comes out. It's a big vessel, so it comes out a lot, but it's not such high pressure as we see with the artery. Okay, so this is the left common carotid artery going up to the head. That one is the left subclavian artery. So subclavian, sub means under, right, like submarine. Clavian's like clavicle. So this is curving underneath that left clavicle to head to the left upper limb. Okay? So brachiocephalic artery, left common carotid artery, left subclavian artery. And there it is on those three, right? They're not quite as long on this one, but at least you can see it like that, the same three. So when you think about it, as you're going along, so it's brachiocephalic artery, left common carotid artery, and then left subclavian artery. So they're kind of in alphabetical order, right? You start with a B, and then you go to C for the carotid, and then you go with an S for subclavian. So they're kind of in alphabetical order that way. Now this one, again, from the torso model, shows us some additional extensions. They're a little bit longer, you see? Okay? That's that brachiocephalic artery there, but just a little bit longer. The thing about this brachiocephalic artery, when we get to the arteries and veins, normally with arteries and veins and things like that, and different limbs, everything's symmetrical. You got one over here, right? One humerus here, one humerus there, one, tibia over there, etc. But this is one of the cases, again, exceptions to the rule do happen. Brachiocephalic artery, there's only one, and it's right here. So because there's only one, notice I didn't say left brachiocephalic artery or right brachiocephalic artery. It's just brachiocephalic artery. What happens is from here, that artery splits like this. And it becomes off of here the left common carotid artery going up. Right common carotid artery serving the right side of the head. And then the right subclavian is going to curve off over that way. So on the left side, those vessels come right off of the aorta. But on the right side, there's this extra little extension called the brachiocephalic artery, and then it splits afterwards to give us our common carotid and our subclavian. Okay? So we'll see that as we get to the blood vessel models as well. We can't quite see that yet because it's not extending out, but we will see that as we continue on with the blood vessels. Okay? Okay, so common carotid, subclavian, coronary sulcus. Do you guys have any questions as we're continuing through? Seems all right. You're seeing it on your models as well. So do take a look on your models as well, because you can only see so much on the screen up here. Okay, so you will see, what's a sulcus? A groove, right? So when we look at the coronary circulation and the surface of the heart, we can see that there are certain grooves, that these small blood vessels are nestled within grooves, okay? So the coronary sulcus actually goes around the heart like this. So here's part of the coronary sulcus like we see through here. So it's like between the atria and the ventricles like this. So the coronary sulcus is going to be along here. It's kind of going around this way. And then there's also some what are called interventricular sulci that are between the ventricles too. So you can see like coming down like that. So the coronary sulcus is going to be the groove that's going to be through here. And then we have what's called the right and the left coronary arteries. So these are kind of tricky because they're small and because they kind of snake in and they're underneath things, etc. But remember, anatomical position, that's right, that's left over here. So this that we see here is the right coronary artery, because it's on the right side serving the heart. Right coronary artery right here. There are smaller branches that come off of it, and each of those small branches have their own names, but this is the right coronary artery. So if we have a right, there's probably going to be a left, but where is it? So we go to the other side here, and you can see, okay, here's some major artery kind of coming around here. So this is part of the left coronary artery, but we can see it's kind of branched already. So the left coronary artery, to see it before it branches, look at that pulmonary trunk right there. You see that little red nub right there? That is the left coronary artery. That's the little peekaboo that you can see before it actually branches, because we know when it branches, it starts to get a new name. So on this model, that's the place where we can see the left coronary artery by itself before it branches. On this model, again, right coronary artery there, left coronary artery, you can see right there, there's a little spot before it branches, right there. That's the shot, the one shot on this model where you can say that's just the left coronary artery. But once we branch like this, these ones get new names instead. Okay? So the left coronary artery is kind of hard to find because it gets hidden a little bit underneath this auricle, underneath that pulmonary trunk like that. Then it says right marginal branch of the coronary artery, or the right coronary artery. So that's the right coronary artery. The marginal branch is right along the margin, if you want to think of it that way. It's right, to me, it makes me think of, oh, okay, I see the anterior side of the heart, and now I'm starting to lose my vision, my image of the heart as it comes along here. So right along the margin along here, right along there, we rotate around, we can see that there's a big artery right on the margin right there before we start going to the lateral and then posterior side of the heart. So this is the marginal branch off of that right coronary artery here. Or on this model, again, right along the edge, turn around, we can see that there's a red vessel here. So that's going to be that marginal branch right there. Okay? So it comes off of that right coronary artery. Then, posterior interventricular. Oh, that sounds like fun, right? A lot of big words, but it tells us what it tells us. It tells us it's on the back and tells us that's between the ventricles. So, between these two models, I have to say that the white base one is much better for this one. So, we're on the back, we're on the posterior. There are the ventricles, there's the artery. So this is the posterior interventricular branch, or you can sometimes just call it the posterior interventricular artery right here. This one is a little bit more confusing. See how it has like a loop instead? So you're like, which one is that? So because it's a little bit confusing like that, for that one, we'll tend to use this one where it's clearer. Again, between people, sometimes you get all kinds of different crazy branches, but for this one, we're going to try to stick there. Yeah. Good question. So, what I would say is, the technical term is that it's a posterior interventricular branch of the right coronary artery, etc. For me, we use call it the posterior interventricular artery. Same thing with that marginal one. It's not the marginal artery. We're trying to do the hub, the right coronary artery. Back. Yeah, exactly, right? The lines are pretty small, so, it's going to be microfiche trying to fit all that in there. Okay, so we did left coronary artery. We did that already. Anterior interventricular branch of the left coronary artery, right? So we can shrink that one. But anterior interventricular is going to be between those ventricles on the front side. So we see it right there. That's an easy one. Now, on the green base model, it's a little bit clearer because it's just one. On the white base model, it kind of branches and stuff like that. It's still there. It's right here, right? And then we have all these kind of lateral branches coming off. What's that? Oh, yeah. So definitely look at it on your models. And then it says anterior interventricular sulcus. So the sulcus is the groove right here where that artery is laying within. So if we pointed in here, not to a particular blood vessel, but we pointed in here, we said name this groove, name this indentation, we'd be looking for that sulcus. Then it says circumflex branch of the left coronary artery. Okay? Remember, we had to peek way in there to see the left coronary artery before it branched here. And then as it's going around here, that one, that red one that we see there, or this red one that we see kind of going around like this, that's the circumflex branch, or the circumflex artery like that. Think of it as going around the circumference of the heart, kind of trying to go around in a circle like that. So it's coming around here and feeding the left side of the heart like that. Then we have the apex of the heart. That's an easy one. An apex, usually you think of a mountain, right? You have the apex like that. But remember, the heart is inverted, if you will. So the apex is going to be down here. That's the apex of the heart, the pointy part down here. It's inferior. And the base of the heart, the wider part of the heart, is going to be up here where all the blood vessels are going in and out. So the base of the heart is up here, and the apex is going to be down here instead. Coronary sinus, we talked about that already, right? We saw it here. Then we see some of the veins. Great cardiac vein. So the great cardiac vein is called that because it's really big. It starts here on the anterior side between the ventricles. So this is great cardiac vein. but then it marches around the left side here. So this is great cardiac vein. This is great cardiac vein. This is great cardiac vein, and it dumps into that coronary sinus right here. So we would point it out over here, or even over here for great cardiac vein. Same thing here. Great cardiac vein coming up here, coming over here, coming over here, and then by the time we get here where it's all coming together, we call that the coronary sinus instead. Middle cardiac vein, that's a nice one. Blue vein in between the ventricles back there in the middle, right? So this is the middle cardiac vein back there. Great cardiac vein, middle cardiac vein, that's the lesser or small cardiac vein, not on your list, but it kind of completes the set, right? So this handles the back, this handles the front and the left, that handles the right. And then, oh, we get to kind of crazy things. So when you look at those last few things, hopefully you recognize that those are not cardiac structures. We see esophagus, trachea, bronchi, and a zygos vein. That is a cardiac structure. So this model has a lot of accessory structures that are co-located with the heart. That muscular tube right there is the esophagus. That's the food tube. That one here, which is more open, it has the rings of cartilage on it that you looked at in 201 for island cartilage. That's the trachea. But notice, again, kind of like blood vessels, it splits, right? So this is trachea here, and then when it splits, these are bronchi. So this is the right primary bronchus. That's the left primary bronchus. Remember, we're looking at this from the back. Right, left. Okay? And then lastly, there's the azygos vein. The azygos vein is mainly within the torso. So it comes up like through the abdomen and through the thoracic cavity, and then it is going to drain as a vein back towards the heart. But it's draining a lot of the blood, the deoxygenated blood from the posterior body wall. So when we get into blood vessels, that's when we'll see the full path of the azygos vein coming up. But right there is the little nub of it as it drains into the superior vena cava. So that's the azygos vein there. Likewise, that little nub right there, that's the last little bit of the azygos vein there. Okay, so we'll see that again when we get to the blood vessels themselves. Okay, one last thing I want to mention, because we've gone through that entire list, is we said this is the superior vena cava, but we didn't mention these ones here. Okay? You can identify them, they're just not on the list right there for right now. But we're going to be getting to them when we do blood vessels of the body. So I just want to familiarize you guys with them right now. So these here, what was this one right here? That weird little extension. So this one's that brachiocephalic artery. So either the aorta, brachiocephalic artery, left common carotid artery, left subclavian artery. So that's that brachiocephalic artery right there. These two are the brachiocephalic veins. So there is some symmetry that way, right? You got a brachiocephalic artery, and you have brachiocephalic veins. So like I said, it's plural. We only have one of those, but here we have two brachiocephalic veins. So this is the right brachiocephalic vein. That is the left brachiocephalic vein. This is draining blood from the right side of the head and the right upper limb, left side of the head, left upper limb. Okay? Likewise here, right brachiocephalic vein, left brachiocephalic vein. When those two come together and join together, that becomes the superior vena cava. This one really shows it, right? Right brachiocephalic vein, left brachiocephalic vein is all that. And then when it comes together, that's the superior vena cava right there. Okay? So you should learn those too, because they're going to be coming as well as we continue on to blood vessels. Okay. So those are the structures of the heart. So in our remaining time, which isn't too much, you should be looking at your own so that you can find those same structures and be identifying them on the green base or the white base